Imagine if an NFL team could score a touchdown so incredible and so devastating in the opening seconds that the rest of the game was canceled. That's it. Everybody go home. We have our winner. It's a wild notion when applied to other sports, and given MMA's unique winning conditions, it raises a question that other sports don't have. What would have happened if this contest didn't end almost immediately? Today we're going to be exploring 10 fights, all of which ended in spectacular fashion double quick, but that in turn, for lack of a better term, saved a fighter from a test in their formidable opponent that it's not entirely clear they would have passed under other circumstances. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point. A massive thanks to our channel Hall of Famers for supporting videos like this one, and these are 10 ultra-fast victories that ended huge challenges before they started. Number 10, Jon Jones versus Ciryl Gane. I can literally hear Dana White seething right now at the thought of this entry, and I will say right out of the gate that I don't think Ciryl Gane was going to beat Jon Jones. And yes, the greatness of Jon's performance was absolutely the result of him coming into that fight with the insane work he put in to get to heavyweight and be effective there. All the credit in the world. But you cannot watch that fight knowing what Ciryl Gane brings to the table and tell me that Jon Jones got the best challenge possible from Gane. It was one of the easiest fights that Jones has ever had. And mind you, this is after years away from the sport and a bump up to another whole weight class, not to mention, in the two fights he had prior against Dominic Reyes and Thiago Silva, he was dangerously close to finding himself on the wrong side of the scorecards. So yes, all the props for how dominant he was in beating Gane in 2 minutes like that, but I would have to imagine that if they fought 10 times, more than a few of them are going to go beyond 2 minutes and put Jon through the paces a bit more. One of the big questions going into that fight was how is Jon Jones going to perform at the upper limit of the sport after all this time against the best heavyweight has to offer? And I'm not sure we got much of an answer to that question.
Prove me wrong, Jon.
Number 9, Francis Ngannou versus Cain Velasquez. I remember feeling so disappointed and bad for Cain Velasquez when I saw the 26-second finish in real time, because I thought, in part because of the commentary, oh no, his poor knee blew out on him and that's why he dropped. After seeing that his knee exploded because he was knocked out by a massive punch from one of the hardest hitters that's ever existed.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Now, there's no doubt that with 2.5 years away from the sport, his litany of injuries, and the fact he was 36 with a whole Hall of Fame career behind him, I'm not saying that Francis was going to get the very best version of Cain Velasquez on that night. But that time off was spent largely addressing the issues his body was facing. And but for his flash KO loss to JDS nearly a decade earlier, it wasn't as if Cain was getting beat down in any of his fights. He was the absolute best. And I think even in 2019 could have been a real test for Ngannou, given that Velasquez is one of the most well-rounded and smartest heavyweights of all time, and given the trouble Francis had had previous with Stipe. But when you've got the touch like the Predator, tests don't get much of a chance to develop sometimes, and that was certainly the case for the former heavyweight champion. Number 8, Rumble Johnson versus Glover Teixeira. This injury would not exist if not for Glover Teixeira eventually winning light heavyweight gold, because I feel like many largely overlooked Teixeira in his post-Jon Jones title challenge era before he ramped it back up and took the title, in part because of this loss. Yes, he was beat by Phil Davis and Alex Gus. These things happen, but given what we know of Glover, and that he's not just a threat on the feet, but very dangerous on the ground as well, it's hard to look at Rumble's 13-second KO of the future champ and not wonder how that fight might have gone if he didn't send the man's tooth into orbit before the fight really got a chance to get going, which, as all the entries on this list, doesn't take away from what Johnson did. The man landed a perfect shot. That's all that is required. He absolutely decimated Teixeira and earned a second title challenge as a result, but I absolutely think there's a lot of difficulty that could have been given to Rumble if that fight goes past its initial exchange. Number 7, Henry Cejudo versus TJ Dillashaw. I have to say, TJ Dillashaw didn't do himself any favors in helping Cejudo skip one of the toughest tests of his entire career by foolishly thinking he could cut so much weight that he looked like an Iron Maiden album cover and still be an effective challenger for the flyweight title. Dillashaw cranked the difficulty for himself up to European Extreme, if you know you know, and all the supercharged EPO blood in the world wasn't going to be enough. Triple C would put Tyler away in just 32 seconds. I mean, the definition of quick work, which really does suck because they're two of the all-time greats in the lower weight classes, and I would have to think that a fully functioning Dillashaw would have been a considerable challenge to overcome, which isn't to say Henry would have lost, but by putting away TJ faster than you can nuke a frozen burrito, the true capability of Dillashaw and how Cejudo would have navigated it we didn't get to see.
It's ridiculous, man. Any other questions?
Number 6, Vitor Belfort versus Wanderlei Silva. I really think that if we had some type of Groundhog Day scenario where this fight plays out on a loop forever, quite a few interactions are going to end in under a minute, with either guy bum rushing the other and landing an ultra combo. In our reality, it was Vitor Belfort who would do so after Silva threw and landed a single leg kick. And since it played out like it did, this is a perfect entry for our list, because oh man did Vandy prove to be capable of so much more than getting wrecked in 44 seconds. It was the 7th fight in both of their careers, although Vitor was more well established, having won the UFC 12 tournament. And while Belfort would of course go on to be great in his own right, the run that Vandy would have after his UFC title loss to Tito Ortiz is absolutely legendary. There's no doubt that Silva had a lot more to offer Belfort than just a single leg kick, even at that early phase of his MMA career. Sadly, we would never get a rematch between these two, or any of the entries on this list, but this instance hurts in particular because they were scheduled for one in 2012. That said, even if it had happened, Vandy wasn't exactly Vandy by then, but Vitor was arguably headed for his peak with the help of his doctor. Number 5, Johnny Hendricks versus Jon Fitch. Dude, nobody, absolutely fucking nobody wanted to fight Jon Fitch in 2011, except maybe GSP, but he'd already been there and done that. And given the absolute smothering that Fitch was known for, a style Dana White wasn't exactly a fan of, his 5 straight victories following that title bout didn't earn him another shot, but instead BJ Penn, a fight the judges bafflingly ruled a draw, which I still don't understand.
You think he won the first and you won the second and third?
Yeah.
Point being, Fitch was one of the best in the division, and where title hopes go to die. Enter up-and-coming Johnny Hendricks. Big Rig was 6-1 in the UFC and had 3 KO TKOs, his most recent of which against TJ Waldberger earned him a knockout of the night. But he wasn't quite known to have that dynamite left hand yet. That came, well, as a result of this single punch thrown 12-second knockout against the Fitchster. Going into it, this was billed as a battle of 2 of the best wrestlers in the division, given Riggs' impressive collegiate pedigree. But that all went right out the window when that left hand landed. It was an awesome moment, no doubt, and put Johnny on the radar of everybody, but there's no question Jon would have been a serious test and made this a grind of a fight under different circumstances, like him being conscious after 12 seconds. Number 4, Amanda Nunes versus Cris Cyborg. Is 51 seconds enough time to decide that Amanda Nunes is the greatest women's fighter ever? That really is the question. Both Nunes and Cyborg have resumes that you could argue should put them at that top spot. I think given their head-to-head matchup and that Nunes beat all the rest of the best, she absolutely is number 1. But fans of Cyborg have argued, partly because their fight was so short, that things might have been different in a rematch. If you don't recall, the two slugged it out early, and in a wild exchange, the Lioness defeated Cyborg to deliver the only loss of her entire career but for her debut. While Cris would angle for a rematch, it wouldn't materialize before she and Dana had another falling out, and she was cut from the promotion. Both continued their legendary careers, and at this point, a rematch seems pretty much impossible. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to see them throw down again, and in large part because of how quickly it all went down the first time. Number 3, Ronda Rousey versus Cat Zingano. I realize this entry being number 3 is a bit of a spicy take, but hear me out on this one, alright? Now, given how quickly Ronda Rousey earned all of her victories but one, why is Cat Zingano here and not, say, Sarah McMahon or Betch Kohea? JK about the second one. But seriously, of all Ronda's lightning-fast victories, in the case of Cat, a 14-second submission win after Zingano rushed the champ, missing a flying knee, the fastest submission in UFC history, I think her particular skill set would have really given Ronda problems, and perhaps could have been the Holly Holm before Holly Holm. Zingano had strong kickboxing, solid grappling, and the overall game and experience to have potentially caused Rousey serious issues. She absolutely battered Amanda Nunes, a win that's aged better than Paul Rudd. She's the closest thing Ronda fought to Holm before Holm, and given the weaknesses that fight showed, it's hard not to imagine that Cat could have potentially done the same. But we'll never know, because it ended in a flash after one of the most disastrous openings fighters of all time. Number 2, Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo. This is another one I think is going to piss people off. I'm sorry, Conor fans, and I'm not saying that Jose would have won a rematch necessarily, because I genuinely don't know, nobody does, but you can't tell me that you would count out one of the greatest fighters of all time while he was still well in his prime. And the fact that we don't know how a rematch would have gone takes nothing away from what Conor did. Jose Aldo was arguably the pound-for-pound best fighter on the planet at the time, and he knocked him out in 13 seconds. It's one of the greatest title victories ever, but much of a fight it was not. In fact, it wasn't one at all, really. When Aldo went on to earn the interim title, and there was that super cool shot of Conor watching the fight, I really thought we might get the chance to see what would have happened if there wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime finish. Sadly, though, McGregor was on to bigger and better things, never to even fight at featherweight again, let alone rematch Jose. I guess we'll never know. Number 1, Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren. I mean, the fastest win of all time in the UFC is certainly not much of a fight at all. And given the particular set of skills that Ben Askren has, mainly watermelon-crushing grip and wrestling that would bring a smile to Kurt Angle's face, it's easy to see how this one might have gone the other way. Don't get me wrong, it's arguably the greatest knockout the sport has ever seen, given how Masvidal did it, how fast it was, and the level of fight. Not to mention, even though most fans look at Masvidal as strictly a striker, he loved amateur wrestling, he was a student of it, and worked considerably on his defense. Do I think it would have helped against a guy like Askren? Probably not, and that is a huge reason this fight is on this list, and the reason it's number 1 is because this is possibly the most career-vital challenge that got skipped as well. I mean, think about it, if Masvidal gets ground into the mat for 15 minutes, his entire life is different. There's no super necessary, there's not even a BMF title, that doesn't even exist. And there certainly wasn't going to be dual Usman title challenges. There was a lot riding on that knee, and a massive challenge skipped. You know who never skips a challenge though, because nothing is a challenge to him? The editor of this video, Max Randall. Please follow him on all his socials, and go check out his kick-ass YouTube channel. Another massive thanks to our channel Hall of Fame members. I can't begin to tell you guys how important you are to MMA On Point. We appreciate you a ton. Fight fans, if you hit the join button, you could also become a Hall of Famer, which unlocks exclusive content, and you might get to have some input on our videos. Like and subscribe to skip the biggest challenge of your life. Leave a comment about how you think every one of the rematches to these fights would have gone. And thank you so much for watching. Peace, I'm out of here.